Welcome to Sun and Fun 2021. I'm Ron Timmermans, one of the many hosts with the Florida Aviation Network, and I welcome you to another of our broadcasts here where we have a series of interesting interviews with aviation personalities. Today will be no different in this interview as well. In the past, I think it was yesterday, we got to listen to two representatives of the Civil Air Patrol, Colonel Garcia, the wing commander for Florida, and one of their inspiring young cadets, Miss Olivia, and I can't recall her last name, but they were great interviews with those. Now, today, we have with us Lieutenant Colonel Gary Dahlke, who is the Assistant Director of Aerospace Education for the Florida Wing of the Civil Air Patrol. Gary, thank you for joining us today. It's good to have you here.
Good to be here.
Yeah, so your role, we learned a little bit about the Civil Air Patrol yesterday, that there is a wing in each state.
Correct.
And the Florida wing has over 70 units and the like, and Luis Garcia and Olivia told us about what they do internally to train people and the like. But in your case, your assignment is external aerospace education. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
And let me clarify, what I'm doing here at Sun and Fun is related to external, and by that we mean external to Civil Air Patrol.
Oh, okay.
We have a program to educate members of CAP in aerospace education, and we also have a public outreach program.
Oh.
So when we say external, it means external to CAP, where we reach out to the public.
I see.
And so that's what I'm doing here at Sun and Fun.
Okay, understood. Well, Gary, you had at least an Air Force career for a number of years in the Air Force.
Correct.
And some flying assignments. What did you say? You flew helicopters for that?
Well, I flew in helicopters. The extent of my flying on Air Force active duty was to ferry replacement parts out to missile sites.
Oh.
And the reason I had to fly along was to babysit classified information that was being sent out, because the part itself was classified. So I had to ride with it to escort the part out to the site.
So someone who had the appropriate security clearances and the like could make sure it was transferred without any breach in security. Yeah.
So if the need to get a part out that's at a distant site in a hurry, we would fly it out. If it's a closer site and not so important, we would drive it out.
Okay.
But a lot of flying was done in order to maintain
These missile sites are in major urban areas?
No, they're in rural, extremely rural areas.
Yeah, pretty remote, some of them, aren't they, in North Dakota?
I was assigned to the 351st Strategic Missile Wing at Whiteman Air Force Base, and we had 150 Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missiles assigned to us.
You probably made quite a few trips out with replacement parts.
I did a lot of driving. Yeah. Most of what we did was driving, but occasionally we would fly.
Okay.
And that was about the extent of my flying in the Air Force.
Good. Well, thank you for your service to our country in the Air Force.
You're welcome.
It's always wonderful to meet veterans and those that have supported our military. This is great. So quite a while in the Air Force, and then you went to work for private industry, and let's see, you're now part of Civil Air Patrol. How'd you get involved with Civil Air Patrol?
Well, it's interesting. The whole time I was in the Air Force, I knew maybe that much about what CAP was, and didn't understand that it's an official part of the U.S. Air Force. It's the auxiliary of the Air Force. After I had separated, and this happened when I started working at Kennedy Space Center, I joined their outreach program, where if somebody wants somebody to talk about NASA or a NASA program or talk about spaceflight in general, they can make a request, and then our team gets a description of what's wanted, and we can accept that speaking engagement. This request came down for a Civil Air Patrol youth group that was at Patrick Air Force Base that wanted someone to come and talk about space to these young, what I later found out were the young cadets of Civil Air Patrol. And I walked into this room, and these young people, probably ages 15 to 18, were the sharpest group of youth I had probably ever seen in my entire life. Dressed smartly, all in uniform, paying attention to what I'm saying, asking intelligent questions that shows that they were listening to me. And I was totally impressed with this group, and I asked the group more about Civil Air Patrol and what it involved, and found out that I could join, and that motivated me to join CAP.
Wow! So you were motivated to become a Civil Air Patrol volunteer by the youth cadets.
Absolutely.
Wow!
No
What a
question
great
about it.
story. What a great story.
Yeah, I can trace my joining back to that one single event.
Yeah.
And so I joined, and when I joined, I said, well, I want to be involved in aerospace education, because I learned of the 3 missions of Civil Air Patrol, and aerospace education is one of them.
Yeah.
And so I said, that's the part that I want to be involved in. And so
Yeah.
I joined and became involved in that component of Civil Air Patrol. And I've been
Wow.
doing that ever since I've joined.
And how long ago was that?
Again, I joined in 2002.
2002, so
Yes.
almost 20 years now.
We're coming up on 20 years now.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow,
and it's
that's
been a
great.
great experience.
And ever since you joined, have you been involved with aerospace education for Civil Air Patrol? Or have you had other
Yes, and
assignments?
I've done a number of things. I've been doing these educational forums at Sun and Fun, which is why I'm here today. I did a presentation earlier today on the X-15. The X-15 is the world's first winged reusable spacecraft. And so I did a educational forum presentation on that topic. And I'll be doing
Really?
2 more again tomorrow.
Wait a minute now. First reusable winged spacecraft. I thought that was a space shuttle.
A lot of people...
You're telling me it was something else?
A lot
Gary?
of people. The space shuttle was heralded. I can remember back in the early days that, yes, we just launched the world's first winged reusable spacecraft. The X-15 was the world's first reusable
Who developed
wing.
that?
North American Aviation, at the direction of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, which was the predecessor organization to NASA.
I see. And so where did it fly?
All the X-15 flights took place from Edwards Air Force Base, California. And there were a total of 199 flights. There would have been 200, but the final flight had a malfunction in the X-15, and it was not released. So they flew up on the B-52, and then it came back on the B-52.
So the X-15, I'm having a memory recall here, and it was many years ago when I was in college in the Air Force ROTC. We got to make a field trip to California, and I was so pumped. Coming from the Midwest, going out to California and visiting Travis Air Force Base and Edwards Air Force Base, and I saw the X-15 in a hangar. I remember it now, and I'd forgotten until you mentioned this. One of the
You saw an
world's-
actual X-15 in hangar?
Yeah, that's how old I am.
Well, all right.
Yeah,
Well, you've got
it's
a couple more years on me, but
Yeah,
not too many.
maybe so. But I have the same sun-bleached hair, so.
But I never had the opportunity to see an active flight.
Well, I believe it was. So this was in the 60s. I
Oh,
think.
yeah. X-15 flew from 1959 to 1968.
Yeah, well,
So-
it may have been the last one or whatever, but it was in the hangar there, and I was just so impressed. And I thought, wow, this is the future. And I didn't really realize that it was the predecessor, what would then become the space shuttle and be such a popular program for, 40 years, the space shuttle?
30-year program
30-year
for
program.
shuttle. Right? No,
Yeah.
let's see, 81 to 2011. That's a 30-year program.
it is 30 years. Yeah,
it
that's
was designed to last 10 years.
Yeah.
The plan for the shuttle program was to be a 10-year program, and it lasted 30
Yeah.
years. Go figure.
So you obviously have worked on the shuttle program as well.
Correct,
as,
yes.
as a civilian, engineer? Or,
Yep, I was a systems engineer, mechanical engineer in various assignments in the shuttle program throughout from 1993 until the end of the program.
So you were there with it a long time as well. But tell us a little bit more about the X-15, because I don't remember that much about it, and other than I was just impressed as a young college student to see it and be around it.
And the thing that impressed me about it was that it had accomplished 13 flights into outer space, but it was during the time that NASA's Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions were making all the news.
Yeah.
And so these space flights were occurring at Edwards Air Force Base on a regular basis,
Yeah.
and nobody really knew about it. If you lived in Lancaster, California, you probably heard about it on a local news report.
Right.
It was not making national news. And when I've always been interested in the X-planes, and I started doing research in the X-15 and found out that it made a number of space flights. I thought, well, this is really an important achievement, and we should learn more about it. And so that's what motivated me to prepare the presentation for Sun and Fun.
Very good. So it would take off underneath the wing of the B-52?
Under the wing of B-52, correct.
Okay. And what, between engines 7 and 8, or 6 and 7?
Well, right. It wasn't on the outboard. It was
Wasn't on the
between
inboard,
the
yeah.
inboard and the outboard,
Yeah.
and would drop. And as soon as it dropped, they would light the rocket engine that would propel it on whatever mission it was doing for that particular flight.
So what was a typical, if there was a typical mission, what would it do? It would be dropped off at what altitude and go up to what altitude?
Good point, because I was focusing this presentation on the space flights. There were like 199 missions, 13 of which actually went into outer space. So I was focusing on that. And the space flight typical profile would be drop it at 45,000 feet, light a 57,000-pound thrust rocket engine that almost literally sent it vertical, a very high angle of attack, and up to 250 to 300,000 feet altitude. And that's the threshold of space. NASA and the Air Force consider anything above 50 miles to be outer space. So every X-15 pilot who flew up to 50 miles or higher was recognized as an astronaut.
Wow. Wow. We just didn't have quite the famous names like Alan Shepard and John Glenn and
we got one famous name.
Did we? Okay.
Neil Armstrong.
Oh, Neil was one.
Neil Armstrong was an X-15 pilot, but he did not make an X-15 space flight. There was a whole group of X-15 pilots. Only a certain number of them made flights into outer space.
He would later, though, become a famous on his own
I heard
right.
his name mentioned a number of times. Yes, quite famous. But when I found out he was an X-15 pilot, I thought that was amazing. That he had this career, which any military pilot would give anything to just have that in their career, and then for Neil Armstrong to go on and do the things that he did with NASA is just amazing.
And Apollo 11 and then moon landing and the first man to land on the moon.
Right.
And he had his humble beginnings in an X-15.
In an X-15.
Indeed.
One more name that is noteworthy because this astronaut was selected. It was an X-15 pilot, flew a space flight in the X-15, and then was selected to the astronaut program. Oh. His name was Joe Engle, and he would have been the 12th person to walk on the moon if he didn't get bumped by a geologist by the name of Harrison Schmitt. Joe Engle was the lunar module pilot on the last Apollo mission, and when they determined that Apollo 17 was going to be the last landing, the scientific community said, we need a bona fide geologist on at least one mission. And the last chance was Apollo 17. So Joe Engle got bumped off that mission, and he was replaced by the geologist Harrison Schmitt.
Bumped off the mission to go to the lunar surface.
Right.
But
so he stayed with NASA.
Module.
Right. He stayed in NASA, and he commanded the second space shuttle mission.
Oh, okay.
So
I'd heard that name before as well.
Joe Engle is a very famous. He went on to become a 2-star general in the Air Force, and he commanded the very second space shuttle mission and flew an additional space shuttle mission afterwards.
Interesting.
And he is now in the Astronaut Hall of Fame, obviously because of that accomplishment.
Yeah, that's quite something. And he also started out as an X-15 pilot.
And started out as an X-15
so,
pilot.
199 missions. What were they doing? Gathering info and scientific evidence for the upcoming shuttle flight?
NACA, National Advisory for Committee of Aeronautics, wanted to gain data, collect data above Mach 5. So they were approaching Mach 5 with the current X-planes, 1, 2, 3, the X-planes that they had in their inventory, and they wanted to go, push the envelope, like Tom Wolfe says in The Right Stuff. We want to go higher, faster, farther, and see what effects that has on aircraft flight. And so the X-15 program had these specifications spelled out, and then 4 aerospace contractors bid on producing that aircraft, and North American Aviation won the bid.
I see. And this was in 1959?
55. They were awarded the contract in 1955.
Okay. And then built the first one?
And built the first one, and the first flight occurred in 59.
Wow. And so for about 10 years then, they ran almost 200 flights.
Correct.
Into space.
During an almost 10-year period.
Yeah.
That was if you were ever wanting to be at Edwards Air Force Base, that was the time to be at Edwards.
Yeah. So they would take off in a B-52, drop them at 45,000 feet, light off the rocket just a few seconds later, and they'd go nearly vertical into space.
Now, that's one profile. The altitude profiles were much different than the speed profiles. The speed profiles were at a much lower altitude, and they required the mounting of external propellant tanks. The rocket engine was going to burn for a longer period of time to get these
to accelerate.
To get the acceleration needed to get to 4,500 miles an hour. The X-15 flew faster than Alan Shepard flew on his first space flight.
Oh, really?
That I just learned during the research for this presentation. I did not know that. So Alan Shepard didn't quite go as fast as some of the X-15 pilots did on their high-speed flights in the X-15, which I thought was amazing too.
That's amazing. And so did they collect a lot of useful data then that was used for the Mercury and Gemini programs? And
More
Apollo?
so for shuttle.
More so for shuttle. That would make sense.
This was just in the anticipation that at some future time we would develop an orbital capable space vehicle. The shuttle was not official at any time during the mid-19 or late 50s, early 60s.
Oh, really? It wasn't even envisioned.
So it wasn't even
as
envisioned.
such.
Probably until the mid-70s, the concept of the shuttle came along.
Yeah.
So the research that was done on the X-15 led directly into shuttle. Taking a winged vehicle and making it capable of operating in outer space is no easy trick, because your aero surfaces do you no good when you're in the vacuum of space.
Right.
And so the X-15 had attitude control for pitch, yaw, and roll, that it could do these attitude changes while it was in the outer space.
With thrusters?
With thrusters,
yeah.
Absolutely. And so that was one of the unique aspects of the X-15, is it had these thrusters that you would use in the vacuum of space, and then you had the aero surfaces that would use to control flight back to the landing site.
Now, we would have those thrusters on like the Gemini spacecraft as well.
Correct, and that's also for attitude control in a vacuum.
Right.
To get the spacecraft into orbit, the thrust vector control on the rocket that's putting it up there is what steered it into outer space. Here's another thing. Every X-15 pilot who flew into space was stick and rudder the entire time.
Really?
They were literally flying that plane into outer space. The Mercury Gemini Apollo astronauts would just sit back and watch the controls while the rocket did all the work. They had basically one thing to do. If it was a bad day, they pull the abort handle, and that activates the emergency recovery system.
But the
X-15 pilot was stick and rudder the entire time,
flying.
Which is so amazing, which is a lot harder to do than just sit back and ride your rocket into orbit.
I imagine if you're going 4,500 miles an hour, you don't have a whole lot of time
there's
recover
not
from
much
mistakes.
room for error when you're going at that speed. So the X-15 pilots are like at the top of my level of admiration.
That is amazing.
Of accomplishment.
Yeah. That is amazing. So for a pilot to advance to commanding and piloting an X-15, what would their Air Force career and their flying experience
right. So Air Force established a test pilot school at Edwards Air Force Base. For a period of time, was led by a one General Chuck Yeager, or Colonel Chuck Yeager at the time.
I've heard of him.
Yes, heard of him too. He ran that school. And so he was literally training Air Force pilots to become astronauts. That was, for the longest time, or for a good period of time, sort of like the pipeline for military pilots to get selected to become NASA astronauts. So some of them went into the X programs and did all kinds of test flights. I mean, the amount of flight tests that's been done at Edwards over the decades is, we'd be here for days talking about it all. But that was their sort of like the feeder program for, if you went to this school at Edwards, you almost had a direct line into becoming selected as a NASA astronaut.
Wow.
And that was the Air Force's idea.
Yeah, and for our younger listeners that may not know all of these names, haven't studied space flight, but Chuck Yeager was the first pilot to break the sound barrier in the Bell X-1, I believe,
Correct,
wasn't it?
right.
Back in
1947.
47, yeah, even before 1950, so before I was born. And of course, his backup for that was, escaping me now.
Well, the guy who got him his broomstick, right? That was his,
Yeah, anyway.
We'll get to it. Google that.
Yeah,
Google that.
Us senior fellows here are having one of those senior moments. But anyway, and the folks you mentioned, Alan Shepard, the first Mercury astronaut to go up into outer space and return again safely. John Glenn, the first one to orbit the Earth in a spacecraft, and then several others that you mentioned, Joe Engle and various Alan and
Neil Armstrong.
Yeah, of course.
Nobody will forget Neil Armstrong.
Probably not, but these are all great people that were just absolute heroes on our planet, and willing to take high risk to advance our knowledge of spacecraft and flight in space and the like, and make many advancements that we have. This is just really incredible, really incredible. So Gary, it's your mission now to do external education as well as some internal education inspired by the young cadets that first got you interested in the Civil Air Patrol. What's next? Are you going to stay with the Civil Air Patrol for a while?
I will absolutely stay for a number of years. And one other thing I do that I've been doing for a little over 10 years now, it was that same group of cadets that got me involved in Civil Air Patrol that were participating in a national activity that brought cadets from all over the nation to Cape Canaveral and Kennedy Space Center to spend an entire week immersed in the space program.
Wow.
So these cadets get to go behind the scenes, into the hangars, into the processing areas, and see firsthand how space flight is conducted, at least how spacecraft are prepared, how rockets are prepared for launch. And they spend a week up close and personal with America's space program. And so after I joined CAP, I said, well, I want to get involved in this. And I asked the director of the program if he needed any extra help. And he said, we'll take you. We'll let you participate. And so I started supporting that for many years, and now I'm the director of the program.
Oh, really? Yeah. So every year?
Every year. Well, except last year, we had to cancel due to COVID. And this year, we're on the edge. We don't know if we're making plans for it, and hopefully it'll happen. But we have to have the Air Force and NASA's approval to do a youth program. And it's their call. If they say we can support it, then we'll have it. And if they say no, we'll probably have to wait one more year.
Tell us a little bit more about this youth program, because there's probably some interested youth that would say, hey, I'd like to do this.
It's unbelievable. The access that these youth have, nobody else gets. I mean, even some higher ranking executives who get VIP tours don't get to do some of the things that these cadets get to do.
So how do they sign up or apply for this?
Well, first of all, you have to be an active Civil Air Patrol cadet.
Okay, it is just for Civil Air Patrol cadets.
It is just, right, it's for Civil Air Patrol cadets. But if you're interested in aviation or aerospace, that's a great...
You need to be in Civil Air Patrol
You need to be in Civil Air Patrol cadet program.
Exactly.
A current NASA astronaut got his pathway mapped out through Civil Air Patrol cadet program.
Really?
Colonel Eric Bowe, flown 2 shuttle missions, was a Civil Air Patrol cadet, and he's still a Civil Air Patrol member.
From the humble beginnings of a Civil Air Patrol cadet
to astronaut. Flown, experienced 2-flight astronaut.
And still in the Civil Air Patrol.
And still in
CAP. Speaks well.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you for joining us, Gary. It's been a pleasure to hear you speak and to learn from your aerospace education, your external aerospace education, and the wonderful X-15 program and the like. I'm Ron Timmermans, one of the many hosts of the Florida Aviation Network. Please continue to join us for additional interviews and programs throughout the week here at Sun and Fun Aerospace Expo.